I came to this city to die, literally. In my jacket pocket was an envelope full of cash I'd saved for my own funeral, and in my medical file was a death sentence stamped by doctors. I thought my daughter was living the American dream. Rich husband, luxury condo, exotic vacations. But instead of a goodbye, I found my Amy not in a happy marriage, like she'd lied to me about on the phone, but in a hospital trauma ward. And her husband, my supposedly successful son-in-law, was at that very moment sitting in a bar showing his buddies videos on his phone. Videos of him breaking her. I realized I had one last mission on this earth, to pull her out of that cage. This is my confession. Heavy, but honest. Hello, my name is John Mitchell. I'm 64 years old. This clip is independent and not a continuation of any other video. Former electrical engineer, a straightforward man, direct, and as my late wife used to say, stubborn as an oak tree. My wife's death 5 years ago broke me harder than I was willing to admit, and I completely shut myself off in my small world. My daughter Amy and I barely spoke for the last 2 years. An old grudge, stupid and sharp as barbed wire, divided us after her mother's funeral. She thought I was too controlling and rigid, and I just didn't know any other way to show my love. After her mother died, she pulled away, moved to Dallas, married some businessman. In a rush, and our communication dwindled to brief, dry holiday phone calls. Before I tell you and explain how a dying man found a reason to live, please write in the comments what city or state you're watching me from right now. It's important for me to know who I'm entrusting this confession to. The verdict came brutally matter-of-fact. The tired hum of an old printer slowly spitting out paper with my name and an incomprehensible string of Latin letters. The doctor, a young guy with exhausted eyes, didn't even look at me when he said the tumor was inoperable, and I had maybe 3 months left, possibly less. Sitting in that county oncologist's office, I understood my own mechanism was completely worn out and beyond repair. I refused aggressive chemo immediately and firmly because I didn't want to waste my precious remaining time on hospital beds and nausea. Hearing the diagnosis, I didn't feel fear, but I felt an icy clarity. I needed to go see my daughter. I needed to see her one last time, give her all the money I'd saved, and just make sure she was happy and doing well. I withdrew all our savings from the bank, everything my wife and I had put away for a rainy day, carefully counted the bills and tucked them into the inner pocket of my old blazer. It came to a decent sum, enough for a good car or a down payment on a house. But for me, this money was now just paper that needed to be passed along. I bought a train ticket that same day without even calling Amy, afraid that if I heard her voice, I might break down and give myself away. And I couldn't stand pity. The train wheels clacked, counting off the miles, and I stared out the dark window at the occasional lights of small towns flying past, remembering little Amy with her enormous hair bows. Dallas greeted me with a damp wind and the noise of a big station I'd long since grown unaccustomed to in my quiet town. My daughter's address was written in my old notebook, and I handed the paper to the Uber driver, feeling my heart start to beat faster, echoing with a dull pain in my chest. We drove along wide boulevards past expensive storefronts and tall new construction, and I thought about how different this world was from what I was used to. The building where Amy lived turned out to be an upscale high-rise with gated grounds and a doorman, which only reinforced my confidence in her well-being. I went up to the right floor, straightened my shirt collar, and pressed the doorbell, expecting to hear familiar footsteps behind the heavy metal door. The silence in response seemed too thick and unnatural. I rang again, then once more, but no one answered, even though it was evening and lights burned brightly in the neighbors' windows. Suddenly, the door to the next apartment cracked open, and an elderly woman with a displeased, suspicious face peeked through the gap. "Why do you keep ringing?" she asked, sharply looking me up and down. "They're not here. Nobody's here." "I'm sorry, I'm Amy's father." I tried to speak politely, though anxiety was already beginning to squeeze my throat with a cold hand. "I came from out of town, wanted to surprise her. Do you know when they'll be back?" The woman snorted and something like pity mixed with disgust flickered in her eyes. She opened the door wider, came out onto the landing, and lowered her voice as if afraid the walls might overhear. "Some surprise," she grumbled, shaking her head. "The ambulance took her away in the middle of the night. They were screaming so loud the whole floor was up, then a crash and silence. Her husband, that bastard, pushed her too far again. May he rot in hell." "What do you mean pushed her?" I asked, feeling the ground drop out from under me. "What do you mean again?" "Exactly what I mean." The neighbor waved her hand toward Amy's door. "Not the first time. We wanted to call the cops. But what's the point? His family's loaded. They'll just pay everyone off. Go to Dallas General, to the trauma ward. That's where she is." I got to the hospital in a fog. I don't remember hailing a cab. Don't remember explaining to the driver where to go. Only one thought hammered in my head. Again, that short word crossed out the entire picture of my daughter's happy life that I'd invented for myself so I wouldn't feel lonely. The ER greeted me with the heavy smell of bleach and medicine, instantly returning me to the reality of my own diagnosis. But now that didn't matter. The duty nurse didn't want to let me in for a long time, citing the late hour, but seeing my face apparently realized arguing was pointless and silently pointed to a room at the end of the corridor. I walked down the linoleum floor, each step coming with difficulty, as if someone had tied weights to my legs. The door to the room was ajar. Amy lay by the window, turned toward the wall, and her fragile figure under the thin hospital blanket seemed completely childlike. I quietly called her name, and she flinched all over, as if expecting a blow. Then slowly, with difficulty, turned toward me. What I saw made me forget how to breathe. Her face, always so bright and open, had been turned into a mask of pain. A huge bruise swelled over her left eye, her lip was split and swollen, and a deep abrasion darkened on her cheekbone. Her left arm rested in a cast, pressed to her chest, and every movement caused her visible suffering. But worst of all were her eyes. There was no joy at seeing me, only wild animal fear and shame. "Dad!" Her voice sounded like rustling dry leaves. What are you doing here?" "Amy, sweetheart." I approached closer, afraid to touch her so I wouldn't cause pain. "What happened? Who did this?" She looked away and began fidgeting with the edge of the blanket with her good hand, and I noticed how her fingers trembled. "I fell, Dad," she whispered a rehearsed phrase, not looking me in the eye. "I fell down the stairs, stepped wrong. My heel broke. You know I've always been clumsy." "Down the stairs?" I repeated, feeling dull rage boiling inside. "And your eye hit the stairs too? And your arm?" I carefully took her good hand and gently pulled back the collar of her hospital gown. On her neck were clearly visible dark marks, the imprint of strong fingers, evidence of someone squeezing the tender throat, trying to squeeze the life out of her. Amy jerked away and tried to cover herself, and tears rolled from her eyes, silent and bitter. In that moment, I remembered her differently, with a backpack on her shoulders, laughing, back when she lived in the dorm and complained that I called too often and was too controlling. Back then, she was angry at my care, thought I was a tyrant, and now she lay before me broken and crushed, afraid to tell the truth. Footsteps sounded in the corridor, and a woman in a white coat with a tired but stern face looked into the room. This was Dr. Stevens, the attending physician, as I learned later. She nodded at me, inviting me out into the corridor. "You're her father?" she asked directly when we stepped away from the door. "Good that you came. She really needs support right now." "This wasn't the stairs, was it?" I asked, looking her in the eye. "Of course not the stairs." The doctor sighed heavily and rubbed the bridge of her nose. "The nature of the injuries clearly indicates assault. Multiple contusions, fracture of the radius with displacement, concussion, signs of strangulation on the neck. We're obligated to report such cases to the police, but..." She paused as if choosing her words, and in that pause I heard what I didn't want to hear. "But there's no report," I continued for her. "Amy categorically refuses to file a report," Dr. Stevens confirmed. "Says she fell. Listen, I've worked here 20 years and seen a lot. Her husband's family, they're well-known people in this city and very influential. Cases like this often end in nothing or, even worse, turn against the victim herself. If you want to help her, take her out of here as soon as her condition allows. She won't find peace here." I stood in the empty hospital corridor, listening to the hum of fluorescent lights and understanding that my plan to come, say goodbye, and quietly leave had crumbled to dust. I was dying, that was a fact, but my daughter was dying right now, only slowly and painfully, and the killer was free, confident in his impunity. The money in my inner pocket burned against my chest, but now I knew it wouldn't be needed for an inheritance. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number Amy had once given me just in case, her husband Kyle's number. The rings went on for a long time, dragging out, and I was about to hang up when someone picked up. "Hello," a drunk, slurred voice sounded against a background of loud music and laughter. "Who is this?" "This is Amy's father," I said calmly, trying to keep my voice from shaking. "We need to meet." There was a pause on the line, then laughter. "Oh, Pops, came to lecture me? I'm at Sullivan's bar right now. If you're so brave, come on over, we'll talk." He gave me the address and hung up. I stood there another minute, looking at the closed door to the room where my beaten daughter lay, and felt the fear of my own death finally disappear completely. In its place came cold, calculating resolve of a man who had nothing left to lose. I turned and headed for the exit. Sullivan's bar turned out to be a place I wouldn't have gone near in my normal life. Flashy facade with neon signs, security in black suits at the entrance, and heavy rhythmic bass pounding even out on the street. Inside reigned semi-darkness cut by strobe flashes, and the air was so thick with expensive cologne, hookah smoke, and alcohol that it seemed you could cut it with a knife. I stopped at the bar, trying to let my eyes adjust to the flickering light, and began scanning the room like I'd done hundreds of times at power stations, hunting for a faulty component in a complex system. I didn't have to search long. Kyle sat in the center of a large leather couch at the back of the room, surrounded by a pack of loudly laughing guys and heavily made-up girls. He looked exactly like I remembered from wedding photos, except his face had gotten puffy now, and his eyes were cloudy and darting. He was telling some story, gesturing actively with a glass of whiskey, and the whole group was sycophantically cackling, catching his every word. I was struck by how confident he was. A man who had just sent his wife to the ER was sitting here like king of the world, celebrating his impunity. I didn't approach right away, choosing a spot in the shadows by a column where I could observe him while remaining unnoticed. I needed to understand who I was dealing with, assess my opponent like you assess the degree of wear on a part before replacement. Kyle behaved disgustingly. He'd grab one of the girls around the waist so roughly she'd wince, then yell at the waiter demanding fresh ice, then just spill drinks on the table, not caring about the mess. This wasn't a man but a spoiled child who'd been given a dangerous toy and permission to break everything around him. After about 20 minutes, when his movements became completely uncoordinated, Kyle struggled up from the couch and, swaying, headed toward the restrooms. I detached from the column and followed, trying not to attract the security's attention. The corridor leading to the bathrooms was narrow and long, the walls painted dark burgundy, and the music sounded muffler here, allowing me to hear my son-in-law's shuffling steps. Kyle stood at the sink, leaning on it with both hands and staring into the mirror with a cloudy, unfocused gaze when I entered, and quietly closed the door behind me, clicking the lock. Hearing the click, he slowly turned his head, trying to focus on my reflection. "Oh, Pops!" His tongue was thick, and a mocking smirk played on his lips. "You actually showed up. What do you want, money? Or decided to lecture me?" He turned his whole body toward me and swayed so badly he had to grab the edge of the sink to keep from falling. I looked at him and felt no anger, no hatred, only cold, disgusted understanding that before me wasn't a person but a mistake, a system glitch that needed to be eliminated. "I'm not here for money, Kyle," I said quietly, taking a step forward. "I came to say that was the last time." He laughed, throwing his head back, and that laugh sounded like cawing in the confined space of the tiled room. "Last time," he spat in the sink. "You know who I am? I'm teaching your daughter a lesson. She deserves it, the stupid bitch. And you can't do anything to me, old man. My father." He didn't get to finish. All my life I'd worked with my hands, turned valves that resisted breaking, pulled cables thick as arms. So despite the illness, I still had strength left. I didn't hit him in the face. Bruises could be grounds for a complaint, and I didn't need that. I delivered one short, precise blow to the solar plexus, putting into it all the weight of my body and all the accumulated pain from my daughter. It was the strike not of a brawler, but of a mechanic who knows exactly where to apply force to stop the mechanism. Kyle made a strangled sound like air escaping from a tire. His eyes bulged from their sockets, and his mouth opened in a silent scream, gasping for air that suddenly wasn't there. He folded in half like a pocket knife and collapsed to his knees, clutching his stomach with his hands and pressing his forehead to the cold tile. I stood over him, listening to him wheeze, trying to draw breath, and understood this man was a coward, used to hitting only those who couldn't fight back. "One more time," I whispered, bending to his ear so he'd definitely hear every word through the fog of pain. "You come near her one more time and I'll be back, and then there won't be any talking." I didn't wait for him to recover. I turned and walked out, leaving him writhing on the floor in a puddle of water that had dripped from his own hands. Leaving the bar, I felt the adrenaline begin to recede, giving way to leaden fatigue and dull pain in my side. The illness was reminding me of itself, demanding payment for the burst of activity. Fresh night air hit my face, but breathing didn't get easier. Inside still hung the smell of expensive cologne and fear emanating from Kyle. I was already approaching the taxi stand, about to head to the motel I'd booked on the way, when I heard fast footsteps behind me. "Hey, wait up!" The voice was male but not aggressive, more alarmed. I spun around sharply, ready for a new confrontation, clenching my fists in my jacket pockets. One of the guys who'd been sitting at the table with Kyle ran up to me, tall, thin, in an expensive blazer thrown over a t-shirt. He looked more sober than the others, and what surprised me, he looked not with challenge but with some nervous apprehension, glancing back at the bar doors. "You're Amy's father, right?" he asked, stopping a couple steps from me and raising his hands in a conciliatory gesture. "I saw you go after Kyle and come back alone." "So what?" I tensed, assessing escape routes. "Want to stand up for your friend?" "No." He shook his head and lowered his voice, taking a step closer. "Kyle's not my friend, more like a useful acquaintance. My name's Max. Listen, we can't talk here, but you need to know what happened to Amy. This isn't the first time, and not just with her." I looked at Max carefully, trying to understand if this was a trap. But in his eyes I read fear, not for himself, but of what he'd gotten dragged into. "What are you talking about?" I asked harshly. "I have something." Max quickly looked around and, pulling a business card from his pocket, shoved it into my hand. "Here's my personal number. Call tomorrow morning from a different number. You need to see this." He turned and quickly walked back to the bar, disappearing into the darkness as suddenly as he'd appeared. I stood there in the wind, clutching the piece of thick cardboard that felt hot to the touch. Videos. Other girls. Max's words echoed in my head, changing the whole picture of what was happening. This wasn't just a family drama. This was something far more terrible and systematic. My phone vibrated in my pocket, pulling me out of my daze. An unfamiliar local number lit up on the screen. Intuition told me not to answer, but I pressed accept. "Mr. Mitchell." A woman's voice on the line sounded smooth, commanding, and frighteningly calm. "Good evening. This is Barbara Harrison, Kyle's mother. We need to meet, without emotions, like adults. I think we can find a solution that works for everyone." Her tone was so confident, as if she were proposing a real estate deal, not discussing the beating of a person. I understood the war was only beginning, and the opponent was already positioning pieces on the board, preparing to buy my silence or destroy me. But they hadn't accounted for one thing. A man with 3 months to live doesn't need their money, and he has nothing to fear. "Fine," I answered, looking at the dark sky over this strange city. "Let's meet." Morning greeted me with a gray low sky that pressed on the city like a concrete slab, promising prolonged rain. And this gloomy landscape perfectly matched my internal state. Barbara Harrison scheduled the meeting at a coffee shop in a business center, a sterile, soulless place of glass and metal where even the air seemed artificially purified of any smells of life. She was already waiting for me at a back table, perfectly styled in a strict beige suit that probably cost more than my entire year's pension, with the impenetrable face of an experienced poker player. Looking at this well-groomed woman calmly stirring foam on her cappuccino, It was hard to believe she was the mother of a sadist who'd nearly killed his wife the night before. But in her eyes, I saw the same cold calculation as in her son, only covered with a mask of social propriety. "Mr. Mitchell, have a seat." She gestured with a thin hand with perfect manicure to the chair opposite, not even trying to fake a smile. "Let's get straight to business. I value my time and yours. What happened between Kyle and Amy is certainly an unfortunate incident. But let's not dramatize, because every family has difficult periods, especially when a woman is, shall we say, not entirely emotionally stable." Her words flowed smoothly and confidently, wrapping lies like sticky cobwebs, and it took willpower not to interrupt her. She spoke about the beating as a difficult period, about a broken arm as an unfortunate accident, and in every word oozed confidence that the world was arranged exactly as was convenient for her. Barbara reached into her purse, pulled out a thick envelope, and placed it on the table, covering it with her palm like a magician about to reveal a trick. "Here's a sum that will cover Amy's treatment at the best private clinic, rehabilitation, and let's say, pain and suffering." She lightly pushed the envelope toward me. "We're ready to pay all expenses, send them both on vacation when everything heals. But on one condition: no fuss, no reports, and no rescue operations. Kyle loves Amy. They're just having a crisis. And if you interfere with police, you'll destroy her life completely." I looked at this fat envelope and suddenly it became funny, bitterly, terribly funny at how cheaply they valued human dignity. Did she really think that I, standing with one foot in the grave, would sell my daughter's safety for a stack of colored paper? I slowly pushed the envelope back to her, trying not to touch her fingers so I wouldn't get dirty in this filth. "You call a fracture and strangulation a crisis?" My voice sounded hoarse but firm. "Amy's not a thing you can break and then pay for repairs. There's no report yet, that's true, but there will be, and not just from her." Barbara's face changed instantly. The mask of politeness dropped, exposing a predatory snarl. And before me stood a she-wolf defending her cub, even if that cub was a monster. She leaned forward and her voice became quiet, ringing with hidden threat. "You're making a mistake, Mr. Mitchell. Think carefully. Amy has a history of depressive episodes. We'll pull up medical records, hire the best psychiatrists. If it goes to court, we'll prove she's incompetent, that she inflicted the injuries on herself in a fit of hysteria. And you're an old manipulator who wants to profit off your son-in-law's family. We'll have her declared legally incompetent, and then she'll end up in a closed facility where you'll never reach her. Is that what you want for your daughter?" She was bluffing, but bluffing masterfully, knowing where to strike for maximum pain. The threat of a psychiatric hospital was terrifying, because fighting money and connections in our system is hard. However, she didn't know one thing. I had an ace up my sleeve that Max had told me about, and I was going to check it. I silently stood up from the table, leaving the envelope lying on the polished surface like a monument to their moral deformity, and headed for the exit, feeling her heavy, hateful gaze on my back. Barely had I stepped outside when my phone came alive again, a blocked number lighting up on the screen. I pressed answer, already guessing who it might be, because the script of their pressure was predictable as the operation of an old assembly line. "Mr. Mitchell." The male voice was dry, businesslike, and devoid of any emotion, as if an answering machine were speaking. "This is Robert Harrison, Kyle's father. My wife apparently couldn't get through to you, so I'll say it. You're listening?" "I'm listening," I answered, stopping on the street corner and looking at the flow of cars. "We did some checking, John." He called me by my first name, unceremoniously closing the distance. "County Oncology, Stage 4, refused treatment. Doctors give you a couple months, maybe a little more on painkillers. You're a dead man, John. You won't have time to see a case through court, won't have time to prove anything. You'll just rot before the investigator signs the first paper. Go home, die peacefully, and don't ruin young people's lives. That's my advice." The connection cut off, leaving me stunned in the middle of the noisy avenue. They hadn't just done some checking, they'd turned my medical records inside out in one night, using their resources as a weapon. His words should have crushed me, made me feel my insignificance before the face of the system and death. But instead of fear, I felt a surge of cold, angry energy. I won't have time, I thought. gripping the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. We'll see about that. This call was the last straw that turned my despair into fuel for war. I caught a cab and gave the hospital address, understanding there was no more time for hesitation and I needed to act immediately. I entered Amy's room without knocking, decisively and quickly, the way I used to enter an emergency section to shut off a valve. She wasn't sleeping, was lying with open eyes staring at the ceiling, and at the sight of me, panic flashed in her gaze. "Dad, what happened? You look so—" "Get dressed, Amy." I interrupted her, pulling her things from the closet, hanging there pathetic and lonely. "We're leaving right now." "Where? Why?" She tried to sit up but winced in pain and fell back on the pillow. "The doctor hasn't discharged me. I can't. And Kyle, he's coming. He promised to bring fruit. He apologized." "Kyle's not coming," I cut her off, folding her jeans and sweater into a bag. "And if he does, it'll only be to finish you off or intimidate you. We're going somewhere safe." I rented a room. What I feared most began. The victim's resistance. Someone so used to their cage they fear an open door, more than the zookeeper's whip. Amy cried, begged me to leave her, said I'd ruined everything, that Kyle was just hot-tempered, but he loved her, that she had nothing without him, no money, no housing, no job. Listening to this was unbearably painful, as if she were cutting me to the quick, accusing me of trying to save her. "You don't understand," she screamed through tears when I helped her get dressed, trying not to touch her injured arm. "He'll destroy us. His father has connections everywhere. You'll leave and die, and I'll be left here alone. What will I live on? Where will I go with a child?" The word child hung in the air, heavy and terrible in this context. I froze, fastening her boots, and raised my eyes to her. "With a child?" I repeated quietly. She bit her lip and turned away, hiding her face in her hands. "I'm pregnant, Dad. 10 weeks. I didn't tell him. I was afraid. And now you want to drag me into poverty so he can find us and kill us." This news should have been joyful, but now it sounded like a death sentence, raising the stakes to the limit. Now I was saving not one life, but two. I didn't argue, didn't lecture, just silently gathered things, signed the refusal of hospitalization to the duty nurses, disgruntled grumbling, and practically carried my daughter out of the hospital. We got in a cab, and the whole way to the motel she was silent, turned toward the window. And that silence was heavier than any screaming. The motel I'd found was clean but modest, nothing like what the wife of a rich boy was used to. A narrow room with 2 beds, shared shower in the hallway, and a view of the brick wall of the neighboring building. When we entered, Amy looked around with horror and disgust, then sat on the edge of the bed and burst into sobs, no longer holding back. "Why did you come?" she screamed at me, and in her eyes I saw real hatred. "You weren't here for 2 years. You sat in your hole, and now you showed up the hero. You broke my life, Dad." Kyle would have calmed down. He always calms down. He gives gifts. We would have made up, and now what? "I'm not afraid of poverty. I'm afraid of his rage that you provoked." I stood by the door, feeling strength leaving me, and familiar dull pain spreading inside. But I knew I didn't have the right to show weakness. I needed to become the rock her hysteria would crash against, so that later, when the storm subsided, she could find support on this rock. "You're right," I said quietly when she calmed down a bit, catching her breath. "I wasn't there. I'm guilty, and maybe I'll die soon, like your father-in-law said. But while I'm alive, he won't touch you again. You can hate me, Amy, but I won't let you go back to that hell, even if I have to hold you by force." I left the room to give her time to calm down and leaned my back against the cool hallway wall, closing my eyes. My heart was pounding like crazy, pounding in my temples. But I understood the hardest part was still ahead. In my pocket lay my phone, and I remembered Max's business card, Kyle's friend who'd promised dirt. Now when bridges were burned and war declared open, I needed weapons, and I took out my phone to make the call that could change everything or destroy us completely. What do you think? Did I do the right thing, forcibly taking my daughter from the hospital and depriving her of her familiar, albeit terrible world? Or should I have tried to negotiate with her husband for the sake of the unborn child? I dialed Max's number, and the ring seemed endlessly long until a cautious hello sounded on the other end. "This is John," I said. "We need to meet." The park on the edge of town where we agreed to meet was deserted and windswept, as if nature itself was trying to blow away random passers-by. I sat on a peeling bench, bundling into my jacket collar, and felt a tightly wound string inside me ready to snap at any moment. Max appeared suddenly, emerging from around the corner of a transformer booth, and his nervous gait betrayed someone used to looking over his shoulder. He didn't shake my hand, just sat on the edge of the bench, keeping his distance, and immediately reached into the inner pocket of his expensive coat. "Thanks for coming," he said quickly, his eyes darting around. "I don't have much time. If Kyle finds out I'm meeting with you, he'll bury me. He's out of his mind right now, searching all over the city for you, got all his friends in the department involved." His voice held not just fear but disgust mixed with a desire to quickly unload the dirty burden of a secret. Max held out a small black flash drive that in his manicured fingers looked completely harmless, though it was actually a bomb capable of destroying several lives. "Here are copies," he explained, lowering his voice to a whisper. "I downloaded everything I had. Thought it was just regular porn or something. But when I opened it," he fell silent, swallowed, and pulled out his smartphone. "I'll show you one clip so you understand what you're dealing with. Just keep yourself together, please." Max turned on a video, and I, gathering all my willpower, looked at the screen. The recording quality was high, the sound clear, and this made what was happening even more monstrous. I saw my daughter huddled in the corner of a living room sofa and heard Kyle's voice off camera, a calm, commanding, mocking voice of a master scolding a guilty dog. He made her apologize for some trifle, for a cup placed wrong, but demanded she do it on her knees looking at the camera. When Amy started crying and asked him to stop filming, the frame jerked and a blow followed, the sharp, cruel sound of a slap that threw my daughter to the side. I looked away, feeling nausea rising to my throat and black fire of hatred igniting in my chest. Watching your own child suffer and being unable to intervene right now through the screen was torture worse than any I could imagine. "Enough," I asked hoarsely. "Turn it off." Max quickly put away the phone, and I noticed his hands were shaking too. "It's not just Amy, Mr. Mitchell," he said, looking at the toes of his shoes. "There are folders by year, different girls. The script's always the same. First expensive gifts in restaurants, then isolation, then this." He filmed everything. For him, these are trophies, understand? He re-watched them with friends over whiskey like it was comedy. Max's words fell like heavy stones, building a horrifying picture in my head. So this wasn't just family drama, not just an alcoholic's breakdown, but a well-oiled system, an assembly line of violence that had operated for years under the cover of parental money and connections. I looked at this young guy who'd known the truth for years, drank with my son-in-law, laughed at his jokes, and stayed silent until it touched his own skin. "Why are you helping me now?" I asked directly, squeezing the flash drive in my pocket so its edges dug into my palm. "Did your conscience wake up?" "I won't lie," Max smirked crookedly. "I'm no hero. I just realized that when this thing blows up, and it will blow up, Kyle's completely lost it. I'll go down as an accomplice. I saw these videos and stayed silent. That's a charge. I helped set up cameras. That's a charge. I want you to put him away, and then I can say I helped the investigation. That's my ticket to freedom, Mr. Mitchell. Pure calculation." His honesty was disgusting but understandable. I nodded, accepting these rules of the game, and stood from the bench feeling the weight in my pocket pulling me down, but simultaneously giving stability. "If it goes to trial, will you testify?" I asked, looking him in the eye. "If I see you're winning, I will," he answered, standing. "But if his old man buries it all, I'll say you stole the flash drive and I knew nothing. Good luck. You'll need it." He left as quickly as he'd appeared, leaving me alone with evidence of crimes that in a normal world would get life in prison. But our world wasn't normal. I returned to the motel with a heavy heart, thinking about how to use this material so it wouldn't disappear into the depths of police archives bought by Kyle's father. The motel room smelled of cheap laundry detergent and hopelessness. Amy sat on the bed, hugging her knees and staring at one spot. Her face was gray, deep shadows under her eyes. She didn't even turn her head when I entered, as if her soul had remained there, in her husband's rich apartment, and here was just an empty shell. I wanted to approach, hug her, tell her we now had weapons against him. But at that moment, there was a loud, demanding knock on the door. The knock wasn't like neighbors or housekeeping knock. This was an authoritative, official knock, promising nothing good. Amy flinched and curled into a ball, and I, feeling my hands go cold, approached the door and looked through the peephole. On the threshold stood two in police uniform and one in plain clothes with a folder. I opened the door, understanding that defending this plywood box was pointless. "John Mitchell?" asked the one in plain clothes without greeting, immediately entering and pushing me aside with his shoulder. "Detective Ramirez, a complaint has been filed against you." "What complaint?" I tried to speak calmly, but my heart was already pounding in my throat. "I haven't broken any laws." "Kidnapping and unlawful detention," Detective Ramirez stated dryly, opening his folder. "The complainant claims you forcibly removed his spouse from a medical facility, taking advantage of her helpless condition, threatened her, and are preventing her return home." The detective walked into the room and stopped in front of the bed where my daughter sat. Amy looked at him with terror-widened eyes, and I saw in her mind the last hope for justice crumbling. Her husband had not only beaten her, he was now using the law to get his victim back, turning the situation upside down. "Amy Harrison," the detective's voice became unexpectedly soft, almost caring. "Your husband is very worried. He filed a complaint saying your father is behaving aggressively and erratically. Can you confirm you're here voluntarily, or do you need help getting home?" I looked at my daughter and prayed silently that she'd find the strength to tell the truth. But I saw how fear worked. Sticky, paralyzing fear of her husband's omnipotence, who'd even turned the police into his delivery service. Amy stumbled. Her eyes darted between me and the detective. "I don't know. He came, took me. I was scared." She spoke in fragments, and each word could be interpreted two ways. The detective nodded with satisfaction, as if he'd gotten exactly what he expected. "See, Mr. Mitchell, the young lady is frightened. We're obligated to question her without your presence, and you'll need to come with us for questioning. Get ready." For Amy, this was the last straw. She suddenly realized what was happening, that her father, the only person who tried to protect her, was about to be taken to lockup, humiliated, possibly imprisoned, and all by her husband's hands. She saw not the triumph of law, but the triumph of absolute cynical power of an abuser. "No!" she suddenly screamed, and that scream was like a wounded animal's howl. "Don't touch him. I left on my own. He didn't kidnap me. Kyle's lying. He beat me. Look at me." She threw off her blanket, showing her casted arm and bruises. And the cops, who until that moment had maintained stone faces, were momentarily confused. But the detective quickly recovered. "We'll deal with domestic battery separately if a complaint is filed," he said coldly. "Right now, we have a kidnapping report. Sir, let's go. Don't make it worse." They led me out into the hallway, twisting my arms, though I didn't resist. At that moment, as they led me down the motel stairs like a criminal, under the frightened stares of other guests, my body suddenly failed. Sharp, stabbing pain pierced my right side, cutting off my breath, and my legs went cotton. I swayed and sank onto the dirty steps, unable to draw breath. The world before my eyes swam, sounds became muffled like from underwater. "Hey, what's wrong with you?" A voice swam from somewhere far away. "Decided to fake it? Get up." But I couldn't get up. I sat on the concrete floor, gasping for air, and for the first time in all this thought that Robert Harrison had been right. I might not make it. Not with the legal case, with Amy. If I died now or they locked me in a cell, she'd be left alone against this machine, and she'd break. That thought burned me harder than the pain, forcing me to gather the remnants of consciousness into one point. I had to endure. I had no right to die today. "Call an ambulance," I wheezed, looking into the detective's indifferent eyes. "I have cancer. If I die in your car, the DA's office will tear you apart. Medical records in my pocket." The detective froze, cursed under his breath, and rummaged in my pocket for documents. This was a small, pathetic reprieve, but it was a chance not to let him take me right now. A chance to stay in the game at least one more day. The ambulance, contrary to my fears, turned out not to be a prison cell, but exactly the breathing room I desperately needed. The doctors, seeing my documents and the yellowing of my skin, acted quickly and without unnecessary questions. Detective Ramirez, who 5 minutes ago was ready to take me to lockup, suddenly sharply lost his official zeal. Dealing with a dying old man they were about to hang a kidnapping charge on clearly didn't appeal to him. Too much paperwork and responsibility if I suddenly kicked the bucket right in the patrol car. They brought me to the ER, injected something strong that made the pain in my side curl into a tight, hot ball and subside. The doctor, a young guy with tired eyes, looked at me with sympathy mixed with professional cynicism. "You should be in the hospital, sir," he said, putting away his stethoscope. "Heart's worn out, body at its limit. What are you even running on?" "Running on spite, son," I answered honestly, buttoning my shirt. "Purely on spite." I signed a refusal of hospitalization. There was no time to lie under IVs. I understood I'd only want a short reprieve. Kyle wouldn't calm down, and his father had already set in motion the machinery of my destruction through the police. I needed an ally, not one like Max, trembling for his own skin, but one who knew how to speak with this system in its own wolfish language. The money set aside for the funeral burned in my jacket's inner pocket. I decided to spend it not on wreaths but on war. I was advised to contact attorney Sergei Kravtsov, a criminal defense lawyer, by Max. Kravtsov's office was in an old building downtown. It smelled of dust, paper, and cheap coffee. The boss himself turned out to be my age, a heavy-set, gray-haired man with an attentive, sharp gaze over his glasses. He listened to my story silently, not interrupting, only occasionally making notes in a notebook. "Kidnapping, so," he hummed, rereading the protocol copy. "And domestic violence without a victim's complaint. Your situation's bad, Mr. Mitchell. Your son-in-law's father is a heavy hitter. If they want, they'll lock you in jail pending trial just to keep you out of the way. And Amy, under pressure, will return to her husband. Your chances are zero. Legally, you're the aggressor who invaded someone else's family." He was telling the truth, harsh and unpleasant. But I hadn't come for comfort. I silently pulled from my pocket the flash drive Max had given me and placed it on the table in front of the lawyer. "This isn't just a family squabble. Look, Mr. Kravtsov, please watch it all the way through." Kravtsov sighed, with obvious reluctance, inserted the flash drive into his laptop. I watched his face. The first minute he maintained professional indifference, but then his eyebrows crawled up and his face began to flush with heavy anger. He viewed file after file, opened folders with dates, and I saw his attitude change from boredom to cold rage. "Jesus Christ," he exhaled finally, removing his glasses. "Sorry, this changes everything." He stood and paced the office. "This isn't domestic violence anymore, Mr. Mitchell. And judging by the dates and faces, we're talking about systematic actions against 2 or more persons. If these recordings are authentic, your son-in-law is a serial criminal. This is a felony. Cases like this are hard to bury at the local level if you immediately take it public. We won't defend against the kidnapping charge. We'll attack," Kravtsov explained the plan. "We needed to urgently file a complaint, but not with the local precinct where Kyle's father had everything sewn up, but directly with the state attorney general's office. Attach the video as evidence. Demand case transfer and state protection." "But there's a problem." The lawyer looked at me seriously. "While the wheels of justice start turning, time will pass. A week, maybe 2. During this time, Kyle's father can destroy you or force Amy to shut up. He'll defend his son to the last as long as he thinks this is just dirty laundry. You need to show him the ship is sinking." And then I understood what I had to do. I had to meet with the big gun. I didn't schedule the meeting with Robert Harrison, Kyle's father. I just found out where he usually had lunch and waited by his car. Security in the parking lot tried to run me off, but I stood rooted in place, leaning on the fence. A pale old man with empty eyes who had nothing to lose. Apparently, they decided not to mess with me. He came out an hour later, fit, polished, in a perfectly tailored coat. Seeing me, he didn't even stop, just wrinkled his nose in disgust. "You're persistent, John," he tossed out in passing. "I told you on the phone, leave and die peacefully. Or do you want them to pack you up right here for stalking?" "I'm not asking for anything, Mr. Harrison," I said quietly, trying to keep my voice from shaking. "And I'm not threatening. I just brought you something. It concerns your son and your reputation." I held out a second flash drive, a copy of the one I'd given the lawyer. "What's this?" He stopped without taking the drive, hands in gloves staying in his pockets. "More complaints from your hysterical daughter?" "No, it's Kyle's video archive. There's not just Amy there. There are dozens of girls over the years. Violence, humiliation, secret filming. The originals are already with my lawyer. We're preparing to file with the state. But I thought you should know the truth, not as an official, but as a father. Watch it, just watch." He stared me down for a second, trying to figure out if I was bluffing. Then with a short, sharp movement, he snatched the flash drive from my hands. "If this is nothing, John, I'll destroy you," he said calmly, without anger, stating fact. "You don't have much time left, but I can make it very painful." "I know," I answered. "Watch the video." He got in his car and drove away. I stood there in the wind, feeling my legs buckle from monstrous fatigue. I'd made my move. I didn't bargain, didn't ask for money or threaten with the press. I just showed him his son wasn't a boy who'd stumbled, but a ticking time bomb about to explode. The entire next day passed in silence. Kyle didn't appear. Police didn't break down the motel door anymore. Amy and I sat on pins and needles. She asked what I'd given his father. I told her honestly about the video. "You think that'll help?" she asked doubtfully. "Barbara, his mother, said they'd go to the mat for their son." "The mother, maybe," I answered. "But the father, he's pragmatic, cynical, cold, but smart. He knows how to count losses." That evening, my phone rang, an unfamiliar number. "Mr. Mitchell." Robert Harrison's voice sounded dry, toneless. "I watched the materials." My heart skipped a beat. "And?" "I'll say I wasn't hired to clean up this shit." Disgusted revulsion slipped through his voice. "The family won't interfere. We're withdrawing our kidnapping complaint against you. Kyle's lawyers aren't getting any more financing from me. From here, he's on his own. Let him answer for his hobbies." Click. He just hung up. No apologies, no remorse. Not a word about his son breaking my daughter's life. Only cold calculation. The asset became toxic. The asset needs to be dumped. He wrote off Kyle like you write off defective equipment that costs more to repair than replace. I put the phone on the table and looked at Amy. "That's it, sweetheart," I said, feeling a huge weight lift from my shoulders. "No more protection." His father washed his hands. Amy cried. For the first time in these days, these were tears of relief. The next morning, events spun with incredible speed. Kravtsov came to the motel, beaming like a new penny. "Mr. Mitchell, congratulations," he announced from the doorway. "The strategy worked. The case was transferred to the state level. An independent forensic medical examination has been ordered. And most importantly, the investigator got the green light to work full throttle. Kyle's being called in for questioning, and from what I hear, he's not coming home." I listened to the lawyer, nodded, signed some papers, but my thoughts were far away. I thought about how strangely life works. To achieve justice, I'd had to go not to the police, but to the main villain and negotiate with him mob style. The law only kicked in when the boss gave the okay. This was a bitter realization, but right now I didn't have time for philosophy. Most importantly, Amy was safe. At that moment, I felt sudden weakness. The ground swayed and I had to grab the chair back to keep from falling. "Dad!" Amy rushed to me, supporting me under the elbow. "Are you okay?" "Fine," I wheezed, sitting down. "Just tired, very tired." I understood my battery was dying. The adrenaline that had kept me on my feet these last days was gone, and the disease returned, demanding its due. But now I could allow myself weakness. I'd done what I came for. The next 2 days passed in thick, sticky waiting, like calm before a storm. Amy and I barely left the cramped motel room, like two animals in a burrow, listening to every rustle in the hallway. I saw her flinch at the sound of passing cars, how she checked if the lock was secured 5 times an hour. Fear had eaten deep into her, and no words of mine could extract it, only time and facts. And there were no facts yet. I waited for a counterstrike. I was sure after my conversation with Kyle's father, they'd start pressuring us, send an inspection, plant something, or just send some tough guys to explain to me, an old fool, the rules of the game. But the phone was silent, and this silence scared more than threats. My body, mobilized by stress, was holding on by sheer will and a handful of painkillers. But I forbade myself to fall apart until I saw the finale. The call from attorney Kravtsov came on the third day, when cold rain lashed outside, washing gray dust from the city. "Mr. Mitchell," Sergey's voice sounded upbeat but focused. "There's news, serious news. This morning, Kyle Harrison was called in for questioning at the state attorney's office." I felt Amy sitting next to me on the bed, tense up hearing her husband's name. I turned on speaker so she could hear every word. "Did he show up?" I asked, feeling my mouth go dry. "Show up? Where would he go?" "Came with his mother's lawyer, all confident and cocky. Thought it would be the usual chat about the kidnapping complaint. But a surprise was waiting. The case was taken by the state office. Mr. Mitchell, your materials were entered into evidence, and not just yours. Remember we talked about other episodes? Well, after information leaked, and we, shall we say, helped it leak in the right circles, another girl came forward, a former employee of his company. She'd been silent 3 years, was afraid, but now she saw the clouds gathering and decided to speak up. She identified herself in one of the videos from your flash drive. Amy covered her face with her hands. I saw her shoulders trembling, but these weren't hysterical tears, but tears of terrible, painful revelation. She was finally getting confirmation. The problem wasn't her, that she wasn't a bad wife, not clumsy, but the victim of a serial predator. "What now?" I asked. "Did they let him go?" "Detained for 48 hours, Kravtsov stated. "Charged with felony assault and unlawful recording. Tomorrow there's a bail hearing. The prosecutor will request either jail or house arrest with complete contact prohibition. But here's the most interesting part. The family's position. His mother's lawyer tried to run around, make calls, threaten with connections. But from what I hear, Robert Harrison, Kyle's father, personally contacted the investigation leadership. Know what he said? I was silent, though I'd guessed. He said, "Proceed according to law. We're not interfering." Mr. Mitchell, you hit the nail on the head at his office. He's a smart man. He realized the video is a bomb that'll bury his career and business too if he starts protecting his son. He threw him under the bus, wrote him off as junk to save himself. When the conversation ended, silence hung in the room. But this was different silence. Not oppressive, but empty, like air after a fire when the flames have gone out and only ashes remain. Amy raised her eyes to me. "He abandoned him?" she asked quietly. "His father abandoned Kyle." "He chose reputation, Amy," I answered, sitting next to her and taking her good hand. "Kyle thought he could do anything because he had a wall behind him. The wall's gone now. He's alone." Then came the court hearing. I didn't want to drag Amy there, but she insisted, said she needed to see it with her own eyes to believe. We sat in the hallway trying not to attract attention. I saw Kyle's mother, Barbara Harrison. She stood by the window, pale, aged 10 years in these few days, nervously clutching a handkerchief. The father wasn't there. He truly distanced himself, crossing out his son from his life as coldly as he fired employees who screwed up. When they led Kyle down the hallway in custody, he looked pathetic. Where was that polished master of the universe in an expensive suit? He was unshaven, shirt wrinkled, and animal fear darted in his eyes. He searched with his eyes for his mother, for lawyers, for someone who'd fix things like before. But when he saw Amy sitting next to me, he stumbled. He wanted to yell something, jerked in our direction, but the guards sharply yanked him back by the cuffs. "Mitchell!" he croaked, his voice breaking. "You'll regret this. You'll die without me." Amy didn't turn away. She looked at him directly, and in her gaze was no fear, only disgust and pity. The pity with which you look at a crushed insect. "I already lived without you," she said quietly, so only I heard. "And it was the best time." The court set bail conditions and a restraining order. He was forbidden to leave his parents' apartment where he was registered, use the internet or phone, and most importantly, come within 100 meters of Amy or try to contact her in any way. They put an electronic monitor on his ankle. It wasn't jail, but for someone used to absolute freedom and impunity, this was a cage. We left the courthouse onto the street. The rain had stopped, and gray but bright sky reflected in puddles. I took a full breath, and for the first time in a long while, the pain in my side didn't respond with its familiar stab. "Is it over, Dad?" she asked. "No, Dad." She shook her head, pulling out her phone. "Not yet." She dialed a number. I didn't know who she was calling, but from her tone, I understood this was an important decision. "Hello, Mr. Kravtsov. This is Amy. Prepare the divorce papers." "Yes, right now. And I want to give full testimony to the investigator on all episodes. I'm not staying silent anymore." I looked at her and didn't recognize that beaten-down girl I'd taken from the hospital days ago. Fear and guilt don't disappear in one day, I knew that. She had a long road ahead, psychologists, therapy, nightmares at night. But the main change had already happened. She'd stopped being a victim. She'd broken the cycle. That evening, we sat in the small motel kitchen, drinking tea from cheap bags. I watched steam rising from the cup and thought about how strangely life works. I came here to die, came to say goodbye, and instead entered a battle I wasn't prepared for, and won. But the price of this victory was high. I felt the disease, which had retreated during the adrenaline rush, beginning to take its due again. Strength was leaving like water and sand. "Dad," Amy set down her cup and looked at me seriously, a bit guilty. "There's something else. I didn't tell you everything at the hospital." I tensed. Was something wrong with the baby? "What?" She hesitated, choosing words. "The pregnancy. Doctors said there was a serious threat because of the injuries. But now it seems okay. There's a heartbeat. I was afraid to tell you. Thought you'd insist on abortion so I wouldn't be tied to Kyle." I reached my hand across the table and covered her palm. "Silly girl," I smiled, feeling a sting in my eyes. "The child isn't guilty of who his father is. This is your blood and mine. How could I insist?" "I'm keeping it," she said firmly. "But I'm scared, Dad. Scared I can't handle it alone. Kyle won't give money, his family either. And I still need treatment." Here it was, the second decisive moment. I could have said, "Hang in there, sweetheart. I'll leave you all my money and you'll manage." That would have been honest, but I felt she needed not just money, she needed a shoulder. Even if old, sick, unreliable, but family. I pulled from my pocket a folded paper, a bank statement, that same burial money I'd brought with me. "You're not alone, Amy. We have money. It'll last for starters. We'll rent an apartment, buy everything for the baby. And then," she looked at me with hope she was afraid to scare away. "And then we'll see. The doctors gave me a short timeline, but they're not gods. Maybe I'll still have time to push a stroller." You know, in that moment, I, an old materialist, suddenly thought, maybe I was given this disease so I'd stop putting off life for later and come to my daughter exactly now. Because if I'd been healthy and working, I would have called, heard her, "Everything's fine," and calmed down. And then everything would have ended in tragedy. The first weeks of our new life in a rented apartment were like slow, careful recovery from a severe, prolonged fever, when the temperature has dropped, but weakness still won't let you stand firmly on your feet. We chose a quiet neighborhood, away from the noisy downtown, with a green courtyard where crows caw in the mornings, an evening smell of wet earth and fresh bread from the corner bakery. Here, no one knew I was a dying old man with stage 4 living on painkillers, and my daughter was the main victim in a high-profile criminal case that local papers were starting to write about. To the neighbors, we were just a father and daughter who liked long walks in the park discussing nonsense, and this blessed anonymity was the best medicine for us. Amy changed before my eyes, like a flower finally brought from a dark, damp basement into sunlight. Of course, it didn't happen all at once. At night, she still sometimes cried out, waking from nightmares, and at the sight of men even vaguely resembling Kyle in Builder Gate, she'd involuntarily shrink into a ball. But with each day, these ghosts of the past retreated further, driven into a corner by work with the psychologist Kravtsov found us, and simple human warmth of our shared life. The divorce went surprisingly routinely, almost technically. Kyle's lawyers, deprived of powerful financial backing from his father, feebly tried to drag out the process, but the judge, having the criminal case materials in hand, didn't give any reconciliation periods. The stamp in her passport that used to seem like the mark of a failure now became for her a symbol of liberation, the first breath of clean air. Meanwhile, the criminal case was growing with new details, turning into a huge snowball that no connections or money could stop anymore. After the story got publicity, the investigator managed to find 3 more girls who'd suffered at Kyle's hands in different years. They'd stayed silent, intimidated by his family, or broken by shame. But Amy's example gave them courage to speak up and come to the investigator's office. Now we weren't talking about a family conflict, but systematic abuse, and the threatened sentence was measured in double digits. Kyle sat under house arrest in his parents' apartment, but rumor had it his father wouldn't talk to him, turning their luxury residence into a cold communal apartment where 2 strangers just coexisted waiting for a verdict. I didn't gloat hearing this news from the lawyer, because gloating requires emotional strength, and I preferred to spend it on something else. My own war with the disease entered a strange stage of positional standoff, when neither side advances, but neither surrenders positions. Doctors at the Regional Cancer Center, where Amy finally dragged me, noted with surprise that the tumor's progression had slowed contrary to all forecasts. "You're like you're frozen, Mr. Mitchell," my attending physician told me, examining fresh scans and shaking his head. "Medicine is helping, of course, but apparently you've activated some internal hidden reserves. Motivation sometimes works better than chemo, you know." I only smiled to myself because I knew exactly the nature of this motivation. I simply couldn't allow myself to leave until I saw my grandchild and was sure they'd manage without me. We began preparing for the baby's birth thoroughly and seriously, like preparing for a space flight or building a house. I, who all my life had dealt with metal, transformers, and current, now learned to understand types of strollers, cribs, and swaddling blankets. And these worries gave me strange, long-forgotten pleasure. We went to baby stores, and Amy laughed, watching me with extremely serious expression check the reliability of crib fastenings, yanking and shaking it to verify structural stability. "Dad, this isn't a generator," she'd say, wiping tears from laughter. "You don't need that kind of grounding and safety margin here. Reliability is needed everywhere, Amy," I'd grumble. But inside, everything sang that I was hearing her laughter again, alive and ringing. One evening when fall rain lashed outside, we sat in the kitchen and Amy suddenly took my palm and placed it on her belly. "Feel," she whispered, looking at me with shining eyes. At first I felt nothing but the warmth of her skin and wool sweater. But then, listening to the sensations, I felt a weak, barely noticeable push, like a small fish flicking its tail in the depths. This was the touch of new life. Life that would continue after me. Life I'd been able to protect by my intervention. In that moment, I understood my mission on this earth was truly complete, but not at all how I'd planned leaving my small town with a one-way ticket. I often remember that day when I stood on the threshold of my empty apartment, saying goodbye to faded wallpaper, thinking I was going to die. I was sure my path was over, that ahead was only pain, farewell, and inevitable darkness. I was going to give away money and quietly leave without interfering with my daughter's happy life she'd lied to me about on the phone. How wrong I was, thinking I knew everything in advance. Life, this clever and wise thing, outplayed me, turning my finish line into the most important start. I thought I had nothing to lose, and exactly this fearlessness allowed me to break a system that had ground people up for years. Turns out, even when you're standing on the very edge, you always have a choice. Step into the abyss silently or turn around one last time and fight whoever's trying to push your loved ones there. Now, months later, I'm still alive, though doctors gave me much less time. Of course, I'm not building illusions. The pain returns, weakness attacks become more frequent and longer, and I know one day I simply won't wake up. But this knowledge no longer presses on me like a concrete slab, doesn't cause panic. I managed to do the main thing. I pulled my daughter from hell. I saw her become herself again. And I know the child who'll soon be born will grow up in love and safety, not in fear of a drunk father. Kyle will get his sentence. His father will keep his money, but lose his son. And Amy and I found each other again, passing through fire. I sit in a chair by the window, watching yellow leaves slowly falling on wet asphalt, and feel deep, ringing peace. My savings, which I'd saved for years for a rainy day, went to rent, paying lawyers and buying baby things. And this, believe me, was the best investment of my life. Money is just cut paper until you turn it into safety and joy for those you love. I came here a poor old man with a suitcase of cash and leave a true rich man with empty pockets but a heart full of love and meaning. I want to tell you something simple that I only figured out myself at the very edge of the grave. Don't wait for terrible diagnoses. Don't wait for crises, and don't wait for a special occasion to protect and embrace your family. Take care of those who are near you right now while you're strong and healthy. Call them, listen to them. Don't brush off their problems even if they seem trivial, because behind the usual, everything's fine, may hide an abyss into which your loved one is falling. I lived a long life, made mistakes, worked a lot, and talked too little about feelings. But at the end of the road, I understood one thing. Love isn't beautiful words, but concrete actions. Please write today, not putting off until tomorrow. Call your children or parents, tell them you're there, and just ask if they need your help. And now I'd really like to hear from you. Have there been moments in your life when it seemed everything was over, but exactly then a door opened to a new life? Or did you have to stand up to defend loved ones when all odds were against you? Share your stories in the comments. It's important for me, an old man, to know I'm not alone, and that we ordinary people are still capable of actions for family's sake.